All right. Um,
Hey, Matt.
so you're Josh Kovensky with Talking Points Memo, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
All right, thanks, Matt. I appreciate your time. Um, so I wanted to start off with
Oh, and just
kind
sorry,
of just
by the
knowing,
way, I did
yeah,
warn you that we're live streaming, so I just want to make sure I don't want anybody thinking I'm pulling a fast one on you.
no. I'm fully aware that we're live streaming right now.
Great.
I wanted to start off with what Look Ahead America is trying to accomplish with respect to voter rolls. So, is it correct to say that you guys are both advocating for states to share residency databases, which would then be cross-checked with voter rolls, and that you guys are trying to do that yourselves? Like, it's both. Is that correct?
Well, we have some public policy objectives that we're recommending states enact that include doing aggressive hygiene on their own voter rolls. We haven't specifically said for them to share with different states, but I mean, obviously that's an important way to make sure that that their voter rolls are clean. And to answer your second part of your question, yeah, I mean, in our Georgia report, our Pennsylvania, Wisconsin reports, and our Arizona reports, we did this analysis ourselves, and we were able to identify, that through the NCOA database, which doesn't compare different states' voter rolls, identify people who'd moved out of the state, and then we did an additional step of investigating to find evidence, whether we could find evidence that they definitely did move out and are still out, they moved back, or are valid, or we couldn't, in most cases, unable to make a determination because we don't have access to the same data the government does. We also did some comparison between different states' databases, and what we found is that, I think we were only able to determined that only about 18% of them were in fact, people who should not be able, and these are not people that are on the voter rolls alone. These are people who are on the voter rolls and cast ballots where we believe they shouldn't have, but only a small percentage in state-to-state comparisons, partially because we don't have the robust access to the complete state data that states do, and they're in a much better position to do it, they say, than some, relatively small 501c3 organization like Look at America. We try, but they can do it better than us if they choose to.
Well, I mean, that's really what I'm interested in. I mean, could you just kind of get into more detail about what the obstacles were? Yeah, kind of at what level did the challenge occur? Was it the data from the county clerk level or the state level? Like where were you running into problems?
Well, look, there were multiple tranches of data that, let's say tranches of voters that we were looking at, and some tranches were just completely off limits to us because we didn't have access to complete data, such as people who have moved out of state more than 3 years ago. So the National Change of Address database only goes back 3 years. So if somebody moved away 3 years and a day before we ran the analysis, we didn't have access to it. We also didn't have access to things like driver's license databases across different states, which would also be an indicator that somebody's no longer able to vote in, a given state because they've taken a driver's license elsewhere, which is an indicator that perhaps they shouldn't be on the voter roll anymore or allowed to vote in that state anymore, depending on the state's residency requirements. The most robust version, initial data screening we're able to do is take the state's own voter database and hand it to the U.S. Postal Service, who has an incredibly reliable matching process on national change of address. But again, it only goes back 3 years, and it's not perfect. We have found that I think between 66 and 80% of the people that match and were permanent move out of state are in fact no longer eligible to vote. So it's not 100%. To get to 100%, you'd need complete state data, and that's just not something that we necessarily have access to. And to do better state-to-state matching, some states do make full date of birth available, and full date of birth with full name is actually peer-reviewed literature shows is incredibly reliable. But a lot of states don't release their full dates of birth, which means we go to third-party vendors, and that's not necessarily perfect. So again, I mean, in all of our analysis that we've been releasing, all of our reports, we don't just release the number that matched on a mechanical form and say, oh, that's good enough. We learned that through our work in some of the legal battles immediately afterwards. That it's not perfect, but if we do subsequent research on things like social media, property directions, etc., we can be fairly confident. but that's incredibly time consuming, especially for a group that's primarily volunteer driven.
I mean, that's interesting. When you talk to people who like work with Eric or who kind of have in the past or just kind of aware of it, one thing that they'll always say is, Eric has access to lots of data sets that you just said you guys didn't have access to, right? So
Yep.
Can you just like walk me through, I mean, what's the issue with what Eric's doing and what like are you trying to offer that they're not? What are you trying to do they're not doing?
To be clear, is that we're not an alternative to a government interlinking government databases. We're just citizens who we say, hey, does this neighbor actually not live here anymore? Should they still be on the voter roll or should they be removed? Because in recent years, we have looked at, in the advent of the 2022 election, we looked at some key states. We provided locals with the NCOA data and said, hey, do some additional work on this and then take it to your county board of elections. And then, in many cases, or I'd say most cases, the county board of elections sort of ignores it or because it's more work for them, right? More man hours and potentially opens up to lawsuits and all kinds of stuff. So it's difficult to do it, but still we have people willing to take the shot. The ERIC system, ideally, it should be able to do a really good job of this, but there are a couple of problems. Number one is not all states participate. Number two is that when states get feedback from the ERIC system, they don't take action. So, for example, we found a case in Yuma of somebody who wasn't just registered in 2 places, but actually voted in 2 places. It's a crime. It's a serious, I believe it's a felony. And ERIC system said it. It was somebody who's also in Wisconsin. Wisconsin Elections Commission said they double voted. The Yuma County Recorder, who's in charge of elections, said they double voted. And the sheriff's office said they double voted. They sent out a detective, made the same conclusion. But the county prosecutor, who's responsible for prosecuting this crime, said that there wasn't enough evidence and just declined to prosecute. So that's often, what we bump our heads up against. But in the grander scheme, just getting voters lists, applying hygiene and removing people from the list who don't belong there anymore at, say, the state level, that's what ERIC's supposed to be helpful for. But there are some downsides to ERIC because it comes with a lot of strings attached and there's a pretty high price attached to it. And also ERIC has the nonprofit behind it has done some things I don't think are advisable for a truly nonpartisan group to do, or supposed to be unbiased. So they partner with left-wing organizations to share data and compare notes. And they also take a very heavy hand with states in terms of requiring them to do voter registration work, rather than just something very simple and compartmentalized, which is identifying duplicate voters on voter rolls.
So with that last bit, you think that there's like an activist quality to what they're doing? Is that what you're saying?
It looks like that. So either they are, or they're making bad decisions that lead to the appearance of it. Again, I don't have it right in front of me, but there's some, I would say, not necessarily, well, look, in the C3 world, and I run a C3, we don't say Democrat or Republican because we're not partisan. But ideological, yeah. So they've got, I think, a lot of ideological connections that would make a state wary of handing over data. Again, but even that's, you could say, well, that's speculative, right? I don't think it really is. I think the ties are there in terms of, and their data sharing agreements, and this has been covered a lot in a lot of the alternative media. But just, I think the onerous requirements to do really aggressive voter registration efforts, that feels like something that Look Ahead America should be doing, or an Acorn type group on the left should be doing, not a requirement to help you get your voter list clean. And, I know you mentioned, at least in the email you contacted me about Look Ahead creating an alternative to ERIC. That's actually something I'm very much interested in doing. And I'm not sure that Look Ahead, because we are America First community organizers, is the right organization for that. So I'm plotting creating a new 501c3, potentially with somebody on the left as like my counterpart, to create what really ERIC should be doing, but do it a lot smarter and a lot less expensive in a way that does not put anybody's even personal data at risk. Because I believe it's possible to do what the ERIC system is doing without actually having any access to any raw identification data that could violate anybody's privacy. And the way it would work is that each state would be given some kind of an application, a data application that they would put on their system, of course, open source all the way. And what that would do is take a few different data components, such as their state driver's license database and their state voter database, and a record by record basis, create a one-way encryption using some very obvious things like first name, middle name, last name, and date of birth in a format. One-way encrypt that, and that gets sent to this new entity. And then we don't know your name, we don't know your date of birth. All we know is that one-way encryption from Wisconsin matches a one-way encryption from Arizona, and then we alert both states of that. And they know, based on a unique record identifier, who that is, and they can take action. So this way, it completely protects everybody's data. It makes it very seamless, and it lowers costs, and I think that's the right way to do it. And there's no requirements at anything. The state just pays an annual membership fee, and they have access to this, and they get the alerts, and that's it. And that's all ERIC ever needed to be, and that's what ERIC was sold to all these states that got them to sign up. So that's sort of my plan, and that's sort of a thing that I'm looking at rolling out in the next 3 to 4 months. The problem with it is, you got to get some initial backers to fund it, and I'm talking like this thing could probably launch with like $500,000 or less, which is a tiny fraction of what ERIC's dealing with. So if you know anybody,
well, part of why I asked that in email is because I mentioned this, but the Texas legislature passed this bill removing the state from ERIC, and also mandating the Secretary of State find a vendor basically to replace it with a startup cost of $100,000 or less. So when you just said that, are you going to pitch them? Is that something you're interested in doing if you can get the money together?
Yeah. And again, I need to find, and I have a few ideas, because there's some people on the left that are very loud advocates for open source voting equipment. In fact, there were a lot more of them prior to the 2020 election. Recently, you don't really hear too much from them. But Look Ahead America's been one of the leaders in the open source election equipment, and we've dealt with people on the left who support that. So me finding a partner on that can then, build this new nonprofit, which can then, charge states. We probably look at like a per record basis, and that's how the cost would work. It would be very minimal, and you could probably look at like an annual budget. We could probably do, if they wanted to sign up, we could have all 50 states.
What databases for each state would you need to accomplish that? Because that is like what makes this impossible for anybody who doesn't have access to the interlinking government databases right now.
Well, we would be you
would be that, right? But I'm just saying, like, without the DMV database or whatever, you can't get the hard match. Is that correct?
It would be, well, look, if we got in fact, we could do, if a state said we'll share our we'll put our voter file into the program, but we're not going to put our DMV file in, that's fine. We'd still be able to, because there's multiple matches that we would be able to generate from multiple sources. So as long as the format going in is clean, so say a state that just they don't want to do their DMV, right? Fine, but they do want to do their voter database. We just need a clean first name, middle name, last name, and complete date of birth. And they could also, we could have another layer of it, which would be full name and social security number, or just social security number. But we don't need them to give us any of that. They just put it through a highly complicated hash. And if a hash matches a one-way encryption, so I could take your social security number and your name, hash it, and I could never hack. I could never figure out what your name is or your social security number is. And we just alert the state when there's a match. And it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that.
Got it.
And look, if they want to give us their DMV, and look, there's different types of matches. There's a match on name and social security. Alert the state. There's a match on name and date of birth. Match on all three. Match on the DMV record, which would also be name, first name, middle name, last name, date of birth. First name, middle name, last name, social security number. And then what a state can do, and we could also, in theory, add this as an additional service if they want it but if they actually wanted to give us their full voter database, we could include NCOA on top of that. Given that the part of the voter database they'd be giving us is already public anyway, in all states, every state's voter database, at least when we're talking about name and mailing address is available. So we could also include that as part of the service. And again, it's not about making money. It's about cleaning up the voter lists.
So, I mean, that's interesting, because I've been talking to some other folks who are, I think interested in doing what you just described. And one guy, Jay Valentine out in Texas, spoke to, I haven't talked to him. Mark Fincham has also suggested that, he's interested in doing this. I guess the question is, I mean, how feasible is this without access to the databases that you just described? Like, I'm correct in saying that, like, the more data you have, the harder a match you're going to get, right? Like, unless you have, like, as you said, social security number or
well, look, if the state isn't willing to provide a full, accurate date of birth, with the file or well, here's the question: is that why would any state do it if they're not going to share the data? And honestly, it's kind of, wait, are you still with me? Or did I lose you?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, it's a really easy project. Look, if Texas signs up, you could probably get a lot of the states that left the ERIC system to sign up. It's probably a pretty easy lift because it's a very straightforward thing. It's completely open source, and it's going to be really inexpensive. Some of the other names you mentioned there kind of scratched my head on, and I'll be straight with you about something else. And this kind of worries me about this project, and I think it's actually why I, as an extension of Look Ahead or as its own standalone, could actually probably the only ones that could deliver on it. And that's because we have no profit motive. The moment you want to turn this thing into a consultant enterprise where people make money or something like that, it's going to start to fail. You'd be surprised by how successful something can be when you remove the profit motive from it. So again, this would really be about delivering a competent service at low cost as possible to states. And I think that's very easy to do. And, I'd like to be one of the people that tries to do it. And just as the way I laid it out to you, it's not that complicated. It requires a small amount of startup money. And then the nice thing about that startup money is completely tax deductible. It could come from a foundation, it could come from a corporation, it could come from anyone. And it doesn't even have to be disclosed, the donor. But if somebody wants to take ownership of it, that's fine too. And I think there are enough people in this country that care about election integrity that raising the funds to build out the infrastructure and basically just build the app, the infrastructure, and then it's going to have an ongoing, like, humans. It can't be completely automated, right? You still have to have people, a small staff in terms of doing customer support and maintenance on it. I mean, again, this is something that could operate on an annual basis for very little money.
Curious, you said that the names I mentioned made you scratch your head. I'm just curious why that is, like what the issue is there.
Those are not names that I'm too familiar with in this space of, they are not known to me, and I could be wrong, just not known to me as being, give them to me again. I think I misheard maybe.
One was Jay Valentine, who, he wrote a lot about his issues with Eric. I think he did some briefings, at least in the Texas state legislature.
Yeah, I read. I think, is that the gentleman that wrote the stories about some kind of latency causing voter fraud by some massive system hacking? Like,
I think that may have been him. Yeah.
And some county that was never named that apparently had 30,000 voters or votes stolen from it because, again, I kind of scratched my head about that because that's just not how it works. Who is the other gentleman?
Mark Fincham.
Oh yeah, Mark's a friend. So again, I'm just talking about the other name. So Mark's a friend, but I think that it's important and necessary. If you really want to build a system like this, it can't be one that's just red states or one that's just blue states. So, I would definitely be looking for somebody. And again, sorry, just to reiterate, Mark Fincham's a great guy, and he had some really great ideas for election integrity. So he's actually somebody that would be interested in working with on a project like this. But I think what's important is that whoever is heading this thing up, that it's a partnership between somebody on the left and somebody on the right, and that it's somebody that has like an intimate understanding of the very most minute voter data and programming and how encryption works, rather than somebody who's dependent on it as like a I think a lot of the, let me go back a moment. So a lot of the issues you see with people making claims about voter fraud is that, or election integrity issues, is that they themselves aren't intimately familiar with how that was detected. So they end up relying on another expert. And a lot of times they don't know that that other expert is snowing them or making stuff up. Maybe there was a symposium of this nature and folks go because they trust the person who's putting it on, but they have no ability to discern whether what they're seeing is bullshit or real. Okay. And that's a problem. So it's got to be somebody with like a level of expertise like myself, or someone else who's like intimately, I mean, I could build this myself. I know exactly, like when I explain to you how NCOA works, I understand exactly how it works and I can tell every detail. And you need to have somebody both on the left and right in this type of partnership who has that intimate level of understanding and is not just a name that's relying on other technical people. They have to have this technical, they have to know how to write a line of SQL script. They have to know how the server architecture would work for this, as well as being able to explain to states why it's in their interest to sign up to it.
Who on the left do you want to work with?
See, if I tell you their name, I'm just going to ruin their careers. So I don't, it's like telling you who my favorite band is. Now they just have to apologize for it and condemn me.
Not if they agree to work with you.
Oh, that's true. But I haven't asked them first. So there are, again, I'm not going to, but we have worked with people on the left on the open source voting side. There's some prominent names there. And I mean, it doesn't even have to be prominent names. It just has to be people who are really competent in what they're doing. And I'd be open to talking to anybody on the left, because again, it's not just the technical expertise, it's the fact that, okay, we got to go into, Maryland. Is Maryland going to hand over their DMV and voter databases or do anything with Matt Brainerd? But if it's Matt Brainerd and somebody like, I don't know, I'm just going to pick a name at random. Who is that woman that was Al Gore's campaign manager? And Donna Brazile. So Matt Brainerd, Donna Brazile thing, maybe we're like, oh, okay. Or I don't know. I don't know if she's a technical person, but I'm just giving you an example. That's the kind of partnership that would be required to get anything like this done on a 50-state basis. And once you start missing states, you start, you start missing voters that should be removed. So, but again, it's going to be hard to find that person in a way, because I think that any attempt to clean voter list is identified as voter suppression. But the other way to spin it is that, if they do the DMV thing, well, then a state suddenly knows a new person that moved in that they could choose to send a voter registration form to, or, to make sure they get registered to vote, right? Because most of the people who move to a different state, most of them have no intention of voting in their old state. Most of them don't. So they just don't vote at all if they're not registered in the new state. So, a state like that, you could sell it to them as, hey, this will help you register faster people who've moved to your state because, they showed up they got a driver's license, they didn't check the box, or they've decided to participate in the NCOA process, which would, not just let a state know that, hey, a voter has moved out and indicated they're moving out permanently, but we'd also let the state they move to know that, hey, this former voter in another state has moved to your state. So, I mean, there's all kinds of ways to package this. It doesn't just have to be what the left would typically refer to as, vote suppression or whatever.
So, what role, here's one thing I don't quite understand. I mean, what role did lack of, like, as you put it, hygiene in voter rolls play in what you also see as problems in the 2020 election? Like, how do you see those two things?
Now, are you intentionally trying to get my YouTube stream shut down? Let me put it. Let me answer.
I'm genuinely curious in the connection here,
right.
Where this issue kind of emerged from. Yeah.
Too bad, because the video is going to now probably get deleted. I don't know. Well, let me put it. Let me talk in theoreticals. Okay. When it's a really close election, if there's a substantial number of, and it's a close election and a really heated election, so turnout is extra high, including turnout that maybe shouldn't be turning out in a particular state. And when you identify in those cases the number of ballots that should not have been cast or that were illegally cast, Not necessarily in the person. No, they may not even been cast by the person whose name they were cast in, right? But cast in the name of people. Most cases, I believe it was the people, but in some cases, it may not. Who can tell? But sometimes that number can surpass the margin of victory. And when that happens, it sort of puts the outcome of an election in doubt. So I'm not speaking about any specific election, but that's something that if you read our Arizona, Philadelphia, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Philadelphia report, you might find something like that reported there. Though I do want to be clear, because I think that the election integrity issue for some has become kind of a tar baby, where you have 100 times more interest in poll watching than you do in GOTV. I think that voter turnout operations in the 2020 election had a 100 to 1,000 times greater impact on the outcome than any kind of illegal ballots did. Again, if you read certain reports, they will say that illegal ballots were determinative because the margins were so close. But what had a much, much bigger impact was turnout, which is really what Look Ahead America was built to do. We're built to be the acorn of the right and to do voter registration and turnout, as well as election integrity. It's just unfortunate that we discovered issues with the latter in the 2020 election.
Yeah, but I mean that doesn't strike me as odd. I mean, if you claim that there's a crime, it's going to be more interesting than the sort of normal, voter registration and turnout operations.
Yeah, and you know why it makes so much noise? I'll tell you is that I started this organization in 2017 for voter registration and turnout, and very few donors, no one really interested. The moment you start talking about illegal ballots or voter fraud, and I mean we're completely transparent. There's certain other folks who they make a documentary about voter fraud and it's very convincing, but they won't give the data to the FBI. They won't give it to the Secretary of State. They won't knock on the doors of the people who supposedly perpetuated it, find out, hey, why are you in these locations? In our case, everything we turned over to the FBI, Secretary of State, and we're banging on the doors of county party officials, of county government officials to, hey, prosecute. In fact, we actually got a prosecution in Tennessee. Three convictions for double voting in Tennessee because we're really sharing this data with as many people as possible as we can without doxing, because we can't just make it all public because it's effectively doxing somebody. But if we give it to a government official, they're the ones who are supposed to have it. And we do share it with journalists. If they want us to walk through them and show them every example of what we found, we're happy to do that. But when you start making claims about voter fraud, suddenly all the low dollar donations start flooding in. Suddenly everybody wants to see your documentary. Suddenly, everyone wants to sort of stop the steal. So I could talk forever about how much more important voter turnout is. And we actually are going to be doing voter turnout in Virginia this year. We were able to raise from some very smart, two very big donors, each kicked in $100,000. So we're able to do a whole field program, mail, phones, digital on voter turnout of disaffected patriotic Americans in the off-year elections here in Virginia. But that was really hard. But, the moment you start talking about voter fraud, even if you're completely legitimate about it, that's where, you raise a tremendous amount of money from low-dollar donors. And I think that's an inducement. And also, I guess maybe it gets clicks. I don't know. If you wrote a story about voter fraud, would you get more clicks than one talking about, Look Ahead doing a voter turnout program in Virginia? Maybe, or it depends on maybe what kind of outlet you are, but you tell me.
I think it's what I said before. That any story about crime is just going to be more interesting than, something like run-of-the-mill voter.
Yeah.
So I did want to ask, earlier, I mean, do you think the margin of illegal ballots in 2020 decided the election? I mean, is that what you were saying earlier? Was it enough to decide the outcome?
I am on a very sensitive stream right now, so I will text you my answer outside of this. But if you read our report, and it's been, again, because they didn't take down the other video where I literally said that, screw it, I'll just say, yeah, I believe that the number of illegal ballots surpassed the margin of victory in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, such that the outcome of the presidential election is unknowable. I didn't say it was stolen. I didn't say who's the rightful president. I didn't say anything like that, because that's what I can actually prove. And in my heart of hearts, I believe I could prove that in a court of law if I had to. But again, yeah, there's a few thousand votes there that, but the turnout operations had a far bigger impact. Like we're talking about like a 9,000 vote margin in Georgia or something, but the turnout operations were in the number of voters who didn't turn out, hundreds of thousands. Or that one side turned out, or I'm going to say one side, but different demographics that were targeted by different nonprofit groups and by campaigns who were targeting partisan bases. That had a much bigger turnout. So look, folks, election integrity is important. Do your poll watching, help clean the list, tell your legislators to join the new ERIC system that Matt Braynard and his left-wing buddy are going to start. That's going to be completely transparent and open source. Great. But it's all about voter turnout, voter registration. And that's where we're going to be putting all of our, I'm going to spend $200,000 in the 45 days of voting here in Virginia solely on that, because that's what really matters. And it's incredibly unsexy because you're right. There's no crime. And if it bleeds, it leads. And, but that's the future for Look Ahead America, really.
Got it. All right. I think that's all I have for now. I appreciate you taking time to talk, or live stream, whatever you want to call it. Is there anything you want to add? Anything, I should have asked you, anything you want to highlight for me?
Yeah, I'd like you to embed with us on our 2023 voter turnout operation in Virginia. We're officially going to be launching in a week or so, but it's going to be called LAVA, which is Look Ahead Virginia, about our using we're 501c3 using high pressure tactics to turn out disaffected patriots of rural and blue collar backgrounds. We had an outside organization, an outside technology firm model the voters for us. We're looking at the right parts of the states. We're going to be deploying a whole bunch of field staffers. We're going to be using really high pressure mail, which is great because high pressure mail does two things. Number one, it gets people to vote. Number two, it pisses off voters. But we don't care if they get angry at us because there's no blowback on any candidate or party. I don't care if they get angry at me or Look Ahead. That's fine as long as you vote. So I really think that the left has been doing this for generations and the right has been doing nothing but complain about it. But it's time for us to get in the game. And if we can do it well in Virginia, hopefully it will convince major dollar donors that C3 contributions for voter turnout of disaffected patriotic Americans is really important in 24. So we can do it when those voices are really important, when there's the presidency and so much more on the ballot. So you can stay tuned on that at lookaheadamerica.org, sign up for updates. But I would personally invite you to come out to Virginia and observe our field program as we go door to door harvesting ballots in Virginia.
All right. Thanks a lot. I appreciate your time. And I have your email and your number. All right. So we'll stay in touch.
Hey, and when the article comes out, please drop me a line. Thanks for your,
Sure.
I'm glad, and thanks for accommodating my weird request here, because some folks, they say no. So, I mean, I don't know if you're going to write a piece that's just going to trash me, but I really respect you for doing this.
First of all, you're not the first person to do this. So I'm not completely not used to it. And I mean, I also just think, journalists, we do have the right to choose from the quotes that we use, and I try to be fair, but I don't think it's that ridiculous request. That's what I'm trying to say. Anyway, I appreciate your time again. So thanks a lot.
All right. Have a great day, man.
You too. Bye.
There you have it.